Hi, Sarah.
Hey, Louise.
Seeing you again.
Seeing you again. Here we are. You should be grateful. Stories of race, identity, and transracial adoption. Angela Tucker. We are on chapter 6, White Privilege by Osmosis, which a teenage boy came up with that
Yep,
saying, which I thought was really,
me too. I loved it.
for a young guy,
Yeah,
was astute.
very astute. This is a very pivotal chapter.
hmm
Very we
It's
dig in to
she's on the plane with her
hmm
parents and her boyfriend going to try to find her parents
yeah, she's
in
on her way to
Tennessee.
Chattanooga, Tennessee,
Hmm
and she has this vision that we all do that I'm going to arrive there and be me, kind
And
of like
feel like, oh, I'm
this
home,
is
because she
yeah.
talks about, like, I thought this was interesting, and and because I've had same feelings. An
hmm
Ethiopian adoptee who struggled with IBS and gut issues, but when he traveled to Ethiopia for a month-long stay, the issues subsided because he was learning that his body needed the local food.
Yeah, that was
Um,
really interesting.
and then he adjusted his diet when he went back. Then there was someone she interviewed who spoke about, traveling to Costa Rica for a yoga retreat. And even though she wasn't in her home country, she was from Paraguay,
Yeah,
she still felt at home being
yeah.
there, and it's funny because that's how I feel about New York. Every time I'm in New York, I feel,
You always say that.
ah, right. Last year when we went, or the beginning of this year, it was, I, I,
Yeah.
I wanted to, I did cry. I remember
Yeah,
crying,
you
feeling like,
did.
I'm home, and,
Yeah, it's that draw. It's the draw.
Mhm.
She,
But
sh
Angela didn't feel that when she
no. Well,
ultimately got to
and
Tennessee. She's like, why don't I feel this? It's humid and
it's
it's,
humid, it's hot, and
yeah.
I don't know. I don't feel black because everyone,
Right.
right? Because now she's among many black people and she's feeling very Seattle. Her voice is different. Before she gets off the plane, a couple things happen on the plane that we could summarize quickly, but she's with her mother and her boyfriend, both white, right? And her mom's very open, but they're having these conversations, and her mom writes a letter that she would like
hmm
her to give, to her family, which was
To
she
her
always,
mother. Her mother wrote a
Mhm.
letter to Angela's birth mother,
Yeah, to her birth
Deborah.
mother, Deborah, and she's always very complimentary of her mother because her mother later she found out did have ego issues in it,
Hmm
but never put them on Angela. She never felt she couldn't just talk about it, write about it, journal about it, and her mother would give her the right feedback and support. And I think that's a huge lesson here for parents, huge because
Absolutely. And it makes for a
mhm,
healthier,
Angela's healthier
more
than
self-esteem
mhm,
for an adoptee, and not
yeah,
having to feel like you're being secretive. And, I
yeah,
mean, there's just all sorts of, if the adoptive parents let their egos into play, which I think
mm.
many do, then that is also self-esteem issues for the adoptee, and shame, feeling
Oh
shame
my gosh,
for
for
wanting to
sure.
know and searching and all that stuff. It's just everything placed
Yeah,
on. I
and yet,
like, there was one thing before we got there that Angela said about, she felt like meeting her birth mother falls into a rite of passage.
yes,
I liked that.
I've always felt like I'm never going to meet my birth mother, but that it's like makes me mad. Like I should have had that opportunity. Like
Hmm
everyone should know their mother, who they're born from. I mean, that's the reality. There's a part in the that affected me when she's on the plane. She's watching a mother with her pregnant stomach rubbing the baby,
hmm
right? Rubbing the baby, and she almost felt like it was against her. You know what I mean? She's watching it and like the love that the mother is feeling towards this little baby in her tummy, and it affected her. And do you have that? I have that sometimes when I watch people with their little children and their babies, like, oh my gosh, that was how was I loved like that? You know what I mean?
hmm
She was thinking all these things on the airplane. Her mind is just
I get triggered when I see, fathers and daughters, and
Mhm.
there's a lot of stuff that
I
I
know,
just,
right?
like, I
What
know that
doesn't?
I lacked,
Yeah.
Yes, I had food and housing and
Right.
all that stuff, but I definitely lacked some other stuff.
Yeah.
I like how Brene Brown
Oh,
describes the difference between fitting in and belonging. She writes, fitting in is about assessing a situation and becoming who you need to be accepted.
yeah.
Belonging, on the other hand, doesn't require us to change who we are. It requires us to be who we are.
You
Um,
know, that is, I stopped last night reading and read that to my husband. And
mhm.
I said, Brene Brown. He's like, isn't she the one with the podcast? I'm like, yes. Listen to this quote. I never heard it. I
No, I
like,
hadn't either, and it's absolutely 100%.
yes.
And I really thought about this last night about just, wow, do I feel like I belong
Hmm.
anywhere? And I don't think I do, except for when
When
I'm
you're
with
with
my
Becker.
son. But other than that, I
Yeah.
don't feel, or New York City, where I do feel like, oh, even
You
though I,
said this to me the other day, just not on live camera, just as we were talking. You were feeling
hmm
that way.
yeah, it just, and I don't know that that will ever shift or go away. I don't know. It just
It's
might
not,
be what it is, you know?
it might be what it is for everybody always that's adopted. You may never, we talk in groups about it on our Patreon cat adoptee Zoom that maybe we'll never get to that place of wholeness.
hmm
But to have these conversations, like maybe in those spaces is where we have the wholeness, or just, I don't know, reading this is, I'm always,
Well, at least, yeah, we
yeah.
know we're not alone in that. Here's something that I'd never heard, because now we're going to get into
Hmm.
this camp and all this stuff. But
Yeah.
she learned that her approach was a weird, it's an acronym, way of thinking. She'd
Right.
been raised in a Western educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic manner, which meant I was taught to reject history that didn't come backed up with written evidence, because she goes into being black and how,
Yeah.
that black people weren't allowed to write or, be
Right.
taught to read and write, and all the interesting ways in which, there's the resilience of the black
Yeah.
community people, with all of that. And so short stories were oral
Yeah.
histories, like,
This, I had a little, a sojourn, a side thing. I taught in the inner city when I was young, okay, in South Central, and I was one of only a few white teachers in an all black school. And I taught history. Okay. And a woman came in, I'll never forget her, Michaela. She was a mother. And she's like, I'm very concerned that you're going to be teaching our children history because, of course, it's the printed books are so full of shit anyway. Sorry, history books, but that's the truth. And I brought in somebody to help me learn how to teach the history properly because I didn't know, right? You get in there and you're like, these kids are not learning anything about anything that has to do with them. That is the
mm-hmm.
truth. And a lot of her books been like resonating with me like yes we do have this thing we do to people in this country. It's just everyone should read this. It
So,
struck me.
she went to a camp that was a
Mm-hmm.
retreat for adoptive families with
Yeah.
transracial children.
Yeah.
And
First,
then,
the first one was in Washington. Yeah, where she
right,
was.
where she grew up. And then as an adult, was asked to come.
Mm-hmm.
It says she arrived in time to catch the end of one of the speeches and a couple of the follow-up questions. Given all that I've shared today, how can you expect your Black child to develop a positive sense of self while under your roof and living in a predominantly white community? The
Mm-hmm.
presenter said. Looking around the auditorium, I saw white parents furiously scribbling on their notepads, some wiping tears. Yeah, this was
Yeah.
I think any white parent who has adopted a child of
Yes.
color should be reading this, as uncomfortable as it is. But I mean,
The
there's
best
some
part about
hard,
that, yes,
uncomfortable truths in here. And
that speaker hit one thing big time that she wished she would have for herself that she's trying to do more of. A woman raised her hand. Okay, well, we're doing this for our child, this for our child.
here,
We live in Vale, and I grew up in Colorado. Vale's
they
as one.
adopted a child from
Hmm.
Haiti.
Haiti, and you're living in Vail, and I lived in Colorado, and even for me, it's too white, okay, and I'm white. So you're in Vail, and she's like, but we're doing this and that. Should we really have to move to like a certain area? And he's like, yes. Is there any other option? No. I mean, that's the reality. If
He
you want,
says there is
yeah,
no substitute for Black community. If you want your child to be healthy, you'll ensure that they aren't tokenized and can have a shot at belonging. Next question. Um, because
next
the
question.
woman said her son was the only Black
Yes,
child in a school. Like, even how
of
could you
course.
even for 1 second think that's okay? I mean, this isn't that long ago. This was just a few
No,
years ago. I
this is
mean,
just a few
five,
years ago.
maybe 5 years ago.
They've done
Eh,
the first step of getting to this place where they're trying to integrate their child, but they won't, people are still
But
inherently
are they trying to
selfish.
integrate
Yeah.
their child, right? I think they
No,
think
for
they're
themselves.
doing,
Yeah.
it's all, this again felt like this is all for themselves. Because then they didn't really, there was
Yeah.
another woman that came in talking about her child, and, they're not doing the deep work.
Yeah.
It feels like they're checking off a box by taking them
Oh,
to
that woman. Yeah.
this camp. And so there was a woman saying, who came in because Angela's
Right.
doing a, a
A workshop.
little, a workshop with
Yeah.
what turned out to be a bunch of boys, right?
Yeah.
But so this woman comes in, I'm the adoptive mother of one of the boys who will be in your class today. He's a 12-year-old who we adopted from Ethiopia when he was 2. I wasn't sure how to tell my son about your class because I try not to talk to him about adoption or race too much. I'm
Oh,
worried
wow.
it'll make him feel uncomfortable.
It's like
So
the two main things in his life, his race and being adopted. Well, let's not try to talk about that.
And then she goes on to tell her like how she deleted some face. So this is around, I guess this was
Yeah.
10 years ago
Yeah.
because it was, or somewhere around, it was after the conviction of
Oh, right.
the Michael Brown shooter,
Hmm.
whatever, the Darren Wilson. And so the mom was, I deleted friends who talked
Uh,
about him like, oh, okay, you're woke, but you're not working. You're not a working
well,
woke.
this is,
You're
what it struck me as is this is why she's in the classroom. Okay. Because she's trying to help and control. This is part of,
Mm,
it reminded me of the kindergarten years when the mom who's always in the classroom is also trying to kind of control that their kid's getting certain thing, right? So right away I was
or
like, oh,
not getting a cert. In
right, or
this
not
case,
getting
I
it. So
mean,
it's like, please push her out. I wanted her to just close the door on this woman. And she also was saying how she used to, every good presenter, Angela's a presenter professionally, right? And every good presenter sandwiches a difficult conversation with a nice opening and a nice closing
well,
and how,
actually, she didn't say every good presenter,
right,
right?
right,
She wanted to
right,
get away from
away from that. But that's how
from
you're
having to have
taught.
pleasantries,
But
right?
that's how she was taught, right? We're all taught when you present, you kind of you put it here so someone can digest it and then you pull it back, right? And she's like, I'm done with that. Like this helped
Hmm.
her be done with that.
Yes, which is good. I mean, people need the hard truths,
They need hard
especially when
truths, and
what astounded me is just that and I don't know why always astounded, but
me
just that
too.
here we are, uh, in the 2020s and even or 20 teens,
Yeah.
and it's still uh, shrouded in these hard truths aren't told when people are adopting. They still
Well,
think, oh, I'm saving this child. And
yeah, so
uh,
her workshop is on, and I agree with you. I'm always astounded too. And I shouldn't be, but it still shocks me. Her workshop is on microaggressions, right?
and well, hearing it says this about, parents, uh, color evasiveness would be a good descriptor for many of the
Right.
adoptive parents. They will travel for hours to make sure their child can get their hair done at a black salon, but they wouldn't choose to move to live closer to that salon. They'll
Hmm.
plaster posters of Obama, MLK, and Maya Angelou with quotes, but they haven't made it a priority to create meaningful relationships with black people.
Exactly. Yeah. So
Hmm.
you're doing your little, it's the pinup poster stuff. It is so the mic she gets into being with these boys. So normally she's done these workshops, her adoptee cafe or whatever, her cafe, I forget what it was called. She would do all mostly girls because girls talk about their feelings
We
more.
have the Adopted Cafe.
What's hers called? Adoptee Lounge. It's the
Yeah.
lounge. We could do the lounge with the cafe. She, yeah, you're right. Thank you. She has always had kind of mostly girls, right? Because girls share and journal and want to be, we have this on our podcast. Like, oh, good, a man's coming on. Everybody that came in was a boy, a teenage boy. And this was very good for her and very good for them because A, they don't share as openly and they're more a little bit defensive. They're boys. It's just that
Well, and
men
they're
are,
adopted, and you
mm-hmm,
have to, it's your survival. You have
your
to.
survival.
Before we get into that, though, I wasn't really, I wanted to make the point of what she's talking about,
Mm-hmm.
um, her quiet thoughts that, because there's still that
Yeah.
rescuing, right? That
Yes.
there's still this sense of white parents rescuing these poor
Yes.
children. And then what she's finally, as she awakens doing this, she's starting to
Yeah.
awaken herself, that her quiet thoughts about black parents must not be able to raise their kids, right? That's
Mm-hmm.
white parents are inherently better suited to adopt us. Since my birth parents are black, I must be better off being raised by white parents.
Mm-hmm.
Assimilating to whiteness will lead to a better life. And then she says, thankfully, this feeling waned as soon as the teens began filing into the room. Seeing them helped refocus.
Yeah.
It wasn't to make the adoptive parents feel like they should get a pat on the back because they brought their kids. It was to help instill a sense of belonging in them.
Yeah.
So, in the kids.
Yeah.
So,
And the
I just
kids.
really wanted to point that out.
I'm glad you did. I'm glad you did. And right away out of the gate, she's like, let's share. So I'm Angela. These are my pronouns. They're all kind of staring at her. And I've had that experience teaching middle school. They're just staring at you like, I'm not talking, right? She's like, I'm Angela. I'm 26 or whatever. And this is where I'm from. And my pronouns are she, her. And then one kid starts right away and brings up the Oreo situation.
Hmm.
And she's just like,
And
it
then he
takes,
says, like, but I'm okay with being an Oreo. It makes me,
right.
kind of unique and interesting.
Unique
And,
and interesting.
people expect one thing from me, but, no, I don't really like sports. I'm really more,
Yeah,
of course, the subtext here is this is what you do to
fit in.
survive. To,
This is how you fit in.
yeah.
This is what makes me unique in my community, and I'm just going to hang on to it like a life raft, really.
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
think. She does tell them very bluntly after she hears some of their stories. She lets them all talk too, because they all kind of start piping up and having she's listening to them having the same experience, right? All sharing and seeing their feelings back and forth and then she has to kind of rein them in and she does kind of just say to them, that is actually not a good thing. And here's why. And I'm sure they're going home with these messages in their head like, whoa, it must have been an awakening for them.
Well, and this line made me cringe. One of the kids saying that he was dreading seeing his mom,
Uh,
not wanting her to ask how it was, and how does he tell her that he doesn't like it when she calls him her sweet little
oh
Oreo?
God, lady.
How are people so clueless?
That's this
It's
is
just,
This is where she says being called an Oreo is not a term of
mm-hmm,
endearment. I asserted switching confidently into educator mode, where the cadence of my voice sounds like a church pastor closing on this message. Being not white in this country means that we bear battle scars inflicted from unwelcome stares, taunts, violence, and even microaggressions from our own parents.
no, of course.
This got their
Because
attention. You could hear a pin drop in the room.
And then she
Gives me
asked,
chills.
one of them, if you could, what would you like to say to your mom? And didn't hesitate. He's like, I want to tell her to go
Oh,
to a city where there are no other white
that's
people,
right.
go live there for a week, be called some African sounding name, and then come back and tell me how it felt.
And some other kid piped in and said, and by the way, you're going to really like it.
Yeah, let's tell her you're gonna love it,
I
right?
love these kids. This is
Oh,
this is such good work she's doing. It's
mm-hmm,
just such good work. And it affects, we all have to keep ourselves in check, right? We do live in a certain place, a certain country. Like everybody has microaggressions all the time. But
mm-hmm.
if you're going to take on this situation that you're this person and I have to have this child, you better do your work, people, because, you
And
know,
the one boy talked about being scared about learning to drive because, black
oh,
parents have the talk. with
Yeah.
their children about if you get pulled over, here's what to do. And he's like, who's gonna talk to me about that? It just, I
Yeah.
had such a, how
Yes.
scary it,
It's
and
so
what a, oh,
scary.
just that's,
I
he
told
doesn't have
you.
anyone to talk to him about it.
Listen,
It's
listen,
so
I'm
awful.
a white parent. I have a Hispanic son. Gonzalez is his last name. His best friend is black in high school. They get pulled over in Santa Monica. They get pulled over for nothing, chatting in the alley loudly. I get called to it and I show up and they're like, oh, they live here? I mean, and I'm thinking, oh my God, this is such a small segment of what people go through all the flippin' time, Sarah. It's like,
I know. I know. I
it's
know.
really, and you can't, how would a white parent teach the child that? They can't. They need to learn
No.
this. Yeah. You
Uh, um, well, there's lots more in the chapter, and as she's on the plane and the things she's thinking about, and I
yeah.
mean, and then, and she gets into some of the, even how just adoptees waiting for their adoptive parents to die, and then they do the search.
Yeah.
My gosh, it's
She kind
just,
of gets into white parents then too, white adopting white people too, because she counsels all sorts of people, right?
mm-hmm,
Not just black people and people of color. She says it is hard too because if you do blend into your family, then you have the whole thing we go through with the, oh, I don't want to offend anybody, and you kind of fit and this whole thing. So she's like, there's not a language for this. Like so many people wait for their parents to die, as opposed
mm-hmm.
to how many people do we have on that's the case,
I
you
know.
know?
Or can't tell them doing these secret searches. Again, it's the shame. Like we're born
It's
in
the
shame, we live in shame.
yes,
It's just, it's always, I doing this podcast is, because I've always felt ashamed my
me
whole life. And,
too. I'm
you
not
know,
sure
I,
what I'm ashamed of half the time.
I know shame and guilt have been my driving forces. And yeah, not a way to live.
No.
So we end this chapter with she's getting ready to go meet or look for Sandy
Yeah.
the Flower Man, her
Sandy
father.
the Flower Man.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm so
So
curious how this is going to go. And we don't read ahead. So
no,
it's
we
like,
don't. So the next chapter is chapter 7, Sandy the Flower
it's hard
Man.
for me to stop because I
I
want to know
know.
more.
I
Like, wait,
know.
I'm still using stickies, by the way, Angela. She's got the highlighter. I got to switch
I
over.
gave up. I can't because there's so much I highlight and that with stickies it didn't work. So,
It
oh
didn't work.
well, I'll have a highlighted
Yes,
signed
you
book.
will. I'm glad that we're doing this book. I'm
Me
really
too.
glad.
Okay, well, we have Matthew coming on. He's
Oh,
great.
yeah.
And so see you in a minute.
See you in a minute.